Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Peter Spezia, and we're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. The game I'll be covering this week on this solo episode is the dimension-hopping adventure of a Lombax and his robot companion, only made possible through the solid-state drive loading speeds of the PlayStation 5. 2021's Ratchet Clank Rift Apart. The closer that Joe and I got to recording, the more I realized, I owed him a favor. And so I said, let me take this one this week. I'll take this solo episode after he helped out a couple weeks ago with the Guitaru Man episode. And, it was going to be an episode with games that involved traveling between different dimensions, but his will just have to wait for another week. In the meantime, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, very relevant this week in the gaming world, but we'll get to that in a bit. What have I been doing? What have I been playing? I saved Hyrule. Finally, after more than 2 months, I finally beat The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. My completion percentage? Oh gosh, I didn't even look it up. It's not very good. I can tell you that much. Maybe only have 60-some shrines done. To give you an idea, only a measly fraction of Korok seeds. I'm a little embarrassed. I'm going to guess it's 20, 25% completion, if we're being honest. There's so much I have not done in that game. But it was getting to that point where it's you know what? Gotta finish. Gotta get to other games. Gotta roll credits. So happy I did. That last hour is tremendous. And it's certainly a soundtrack where music doesn't drive a lot of the experience. But when it hits, and those cues, oh man, it's special. It's going to be something to discuss, certainly when it comes to our best of 2023 game soundtracks at the end of the year. Where does Tears of the Kingdom place? Because as far as favorite games of the year goes, it's up there. I feel like I had some complaints with it. There's no denying the quality. Please have Tears of the Kingdom win all of the Game of the Year awards. But as far as personal preference, there could still be room for something to knock it off. It's still going to be very high on my Game of the Year list personally at the end of the year. But yeah, wow, finally glad I got that done. As far as composer follow-up news this week, got a few headlines from the game industry. We've talked about plenty of composers on the show, and when they get brought back up in game news, it's important to bring it up or just see what else they're doing outside of the game industry. We talked about an Octopath Traveler concert announced by Square Enix last week on the show, and Square Enix not done, or at least a Square Enix property, because there's a Nier concert that is actually going on a small worldwide tour in Q1 2024, with tour stops in Los Angeles, Chicago, Berlin, Barcelona, Paris, Bangkok, and Orlando, at least as far as what's currently announced. According to the announcement video that went on with the news, Emmy Evans, who we talked about in episode 117 for her work on the original Nier, she's the main vocalist for the franchise, and she will apparently be in attendance for vocal performances, as will Janique Nicole, and she's the vocalist on Automata's Weight of the World. So neat to have those vocalists supposedly go on tour with the orchestra with a video and performance that's arranged by Keiichi Okabe, and Yoko Taro has some work behind it. I guess Kira Buckland and Kyle McCarley, the voices of 2B and 9S, have recorded something to go along with the concert as well. So a big delight for Nier fans out there. That's really, really neat to see. To celebrate One Piece Day and the franchise's 26th anniversary, news came out from the video game space. We talked about One Piece Pirate Warriors 4 at the beginning of this year, and it's oh yeah, they had some DLC characters, and release some characters and add to the One Piece Muso. Well, they're getting more DLC characters on the way in Character Pass 2, because why not? You can buy Character Pass 2 right now if you have that game. You'll be getting 3 bundles of 3 characters each over time. And the first of these packs launches in September 2023, where one of the characters is confirmed to be Onigashima Battle Luffy. You apparently have a Gear 5 option with him, quote, when using special techniques, end quote. So maybe this means more music from Masayoshi Sasaki? Maybe? I mean, we talked about that game on episode 206. It wasn't all that long ago. Surprised to see DLC news for Pirate Warriors 4. Every now and then, Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Extra Game Library news comes out, and what games are coming to the service? Well, Celeste is coming to Xbox Game Pass on August 1st. Talked about Celeste in episode 29 of Original Soundchat, and I feel like it's coming back. I feel like Celeste was part of Game Pass for a while, and then it went away, so I guess welcome back, Celeste, to Game Pass. Meanwhile, Undertale, which we talked about on episode 24 of the show, is now part of the PlayStation Plus Extra game library. One of the new releases for games this week is Disney Illusion Island. It's a pretty cool looking Metroidvania that's visually based on the modern Mickey Mouse shorts. It's out this Friday on July 28th, and it features music by David Houston. David Houston, we talked about him a long time ago on episode 14 of the show for his work on Thomas Was Alone. And as the world is gripped by Barbenheimer at cinemas across the world, I still have not seen the Super Mario Brothers movie. I mean, obviously I know about Peaches, but still haven't seen it yet. And then I came across the news that at least in the US, the Super Mario Bros. Movie will be streaming on Peacock on August 3rd. Relevant to the show because the score for the movie is composed by Brian Tyler, and we talked about him on episode 75 for his work on Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Not sure what that means for distribution for streaming around the world. Don't know where NBC Universal Comcast has their distribution rights for streaming all tied up, but maybe I'll get to finally see that movie. All right, time to talk about my game that I'm bringing to the show this week, and it is 2021's Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. It's almost like ripped apart, but a dimensional rift. You know, not the first time that we've talked about Ratchet & Clank on the show. We brought the remake from 2016 to the show on episode 124. But since that was a remake, this game, Rift Apart, is technically a sequel to the last new game in the franchise, 2013's Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus, which launched on PlayStation 3. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart released June 11th, 2021 for the PlayStation 5. Pretty sure we talked about Ratchet & Clank that week of the show because, hey, the next Ratchet & Clank game was coming out, so gives you a sense on how long ago we've talked about it. But it's relevant this week because a PC version of Rift Apart, made by PlayStation's PC port specialists, Nixxes Software, it releases tomorrow, as of time of episode release, on July 26th, 2023. The original game is developed by Insomniac Games, and it's published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. What is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart? It's a third-person action-adventure game with elements of platforming, shooting, and puzzle solving. It's a lot of run and gun, shoot enemies with a bunch of different weapons, and solve puzzles here and there to advance a story. Now, it retains elements of previous Ratchet & Clank games, such as strafing, gunplay, with an arsenal of over 20 weapons. You collect bolts as a kind of currency that drops from enemies. There's an automatic weapon and health upgrade system. You collect raritanium to manually upgrade your weapons further. And of course, there are also gadgets. But the biggest thing that this game introduces to the series is the concept of real-time, near-instantaneous travel between different areas, planets, and other worlds within gameplay scenes via a system of interdimensional portals, and it's all thanks to the power of the PlayStation 5. Because after all, this game is exclusive to PS5. Well, I guess no longer when it comes to PC, but for a while it was one of those shining and rare PS5 exclusives. For players to jump between dimensions like this, the player uses a mechanic called the Rift Tether, which is introduced in Ratchet's arsenal, basically with the tap of L1 at certain points where the world is glowing and you kind of move up to it. A tether goes out and it pulls Ratchet through this dimension and goes from one side of the portal to another and allows him to move quickly between points. In addition, the game features enhanced mobility and traversal options, with the addition of moves such as dashing and wall running. You get this phantom dash, you basically dash in the air. It's super cool. Moving feels really nice in this game. Clank, meanwhile, has some anomaly gameplay sections. Basically, they're more puzzle heavy. You have to explore a space and throw these spheres that have specialized abilities into different spots in order to essentially direct a group of virtual lemmings toward a final goal. It's the best way I can describe it. Once you see it, it'll make sense. The story of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. Sometime after the events of Into the Nexus, Ratchet and his robot buddy Clank are celebrated as galactic heroes during a parade. During it, Clank reveals that he has repaired the Dimensionator, a device capable of opening rifts to other dimensions so that Ratchet can search for the Lombax race and his missing family. However, Dr. Nefarious suddenly attacks the parade and attempts to steal the Dimensionator. But during the struggle, Ratchet unthinkingly shoots the device, which causes dimensional rifts to begin opening randomly. Ratchet, Clank, and Dr. Nefarious end up being transported to an alternate universe, where the Dimensionator explodes, damaging the fabric of space and time and separating the three. Clank awakens to find himself alone, and now missing his right arm from the blast. He is then discovered and picked up by a female Lombax named Rivet. Meanwhile, Dr. Nefarious ends up in a throne room, where he is mistaken for Emperor Nefarious, an alternate version of himself who, unlike him, has never been defeated and rules over the galaxy. Ratchet, elsewhere, finds himself alone and starts his search for Clank. With the Emperor currently absent on a conquest, Dr. Nefarious secretly assumes his identity and sends his new minions after Ratchet and Rivet. Ratchet, meanwhile, continues his search and witnesses Rivet escaping the planet with Clank. But he also comes across members of the Resistance against Emperor Nefarious, including a robot companion of his own named Kit. Can Ratchet and Kit, as well as Rivet and Clank, find their own paths on not only their personal journeys, but also to fix the broken Dimensionator and set time and space right? And what happens when the real Emperor Nefarious returns from his conquest? This is where I would ask Joe, what are your experiences with Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart? And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he or at least his roommate has it on his PlayStation 5. It's sitting there. It might even still be installed, but I don't think he's gotten to it yet. I would highly recommend that he gets to it because I did play Rift Apart near its launch in 2021. Just loved it. I platinumed the game. I played it a whole bunch. really enjoyed my time with it. That is a really fun game, and especially when you have a PlayStation 5, a good showpiece for using that solid state drive to load in new worlds and new experiences. It's just so good. Insomniac, they're just always on top of their game, and it makes me excited for, in a few months' time when their next game, Spider-Man 2, drops, and we got that story trailer this past week. It's a good time for Insomniac, though hopefully PlayStation's PC port goes better than the last one with The Last of Us Part 1, because that wasn't the smoothest launch, but we'll see how this Rift Apart PC launch goes. Because, it should be an interesting way to adapt that game, and I didn't even check the specs. Like, do you need to install the game on a solid state drive to make those transitions work? Should be interesting to see. Beyond that, though, personally, outside of how much I enjoyed playing it, I think Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was my third favorite game of 2021. We had it as an honorable mention on our best of 2021 list. And let's just dive into the game a little bit more and dive into its soundtrack, because both are some interesting stories here. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was developed with the specific intent of being a PlayStation 5 exclusive title, and it was intended to appeal to veterans and newcomers of the series, while also serving up as a follow-up to both Ratchet & Clank Into the Nexus and the 2016 remake of Ratchet & Clank. The game director, Mike Daly, said, quote, "We wanted to make a game that was new and took the experience further than it had before. When we were thinking about what we could do, knowing what we could never do before, it became clear that so much of the structure of games is informed by how you're able to load things into memory. And so when the team decided to load different dimensions through the solid-state drive of the PS5, quote, what would a different dimension of Ratchet & Clank be like? And in particular, what would Ratchet's life be like if he didn't have a Clank?" So the team took their previous experiences on games like Sunset Overdrive and Marvel's Spider-Man to come up with movement mechanics that could work, especially if Ratchet did not have Clank. And I would say they certainly made that work, helped him be more mobile. And where did Clank go? Clank ended up with Rivet. Rivet is the star of the show, the star of the game. And lead writer Lauren Mee and lead animator Lindsay Thompson were very interested in a new character to the franchise that would have their own perspective and survival instincts that were embodied by their given circumstances in a darker universe. Thompson described Rivet as having a, quote, tough exterior and perceived coolness. She's never cynical, dark, or cruel. Sure, she might not know the best way to act in a social situation, but she sure as hell isn't shy, end quote. Smith noted that the team were interested in representing complexity and nuance with parallel counterparts of characters, citing the importance of not depicting characters like Rivet as a one-dimensional antithesis to their counterparts in every way. And of course, Rivet shines with the performance of Jennifer Hale, a legendary voice actress, one of the best working in the business. So many characters. The Wikipedia article, of course, noted her performance as female Commander Shepard, but many more than that. Jennifer Hale just gave an amazing performance to Rivet and was nominated for that work. It just really gives the game its own personality. And a lot of people like Rivet, even as soon as Rivet was teased, because that happened when the game was announced for the first time at the PlayStation 5 reveal stream on June 11th, 2020. The first gameplay was shown at Gamescom's opening night live, with a 7-minute demo on August 27th, 2020. The release date was then announced on February 11th, 2021, with then 16 minutes of gameplay shown at a PlayStation State of Play on April 29th, 2021, just a couple of months before the June 11 release. That means there was exactly 1 year from reveal to release, and that was even during the pandemic. So, you know what? Nailed it. That's a good turnaround time. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart reviewed very well, with a Metacritic average of 88. Critics praised the visuals, combat, and technical advancements. If anything, the biggest critique is that a slight bit of fatigue sets in when you play Rivet levels, which are basically the same as Ratchet levels. I mean, it's all kind of the same, but you're just going through a reskin, essentially. There's nothing that Rivet really does unique on her own. So I guess there's that. So it can start to feel a little samey after a while. But honestly, the gameplay is really fun, and so I'll give it that. Rift Apart was the best-selling game in the United States in June 2021. As of July 18th, 21, so just about a month or so after release, the game sold over 1.1 million copies worldwide. There has been no more information of any further sales data since then. And honestly, it led me to looking up the page. Wikipedia has these articles like list of the best-selling software. Game Boy Advance, Super Nintendo, and we've had some fun little mini games with that. What's the state of the list of the best-selling PlayStation 5 games page? I recommend you go check it out for yourself because it is hilarious and sad. Please, game companies, let us know how much your games are being sold. Nintendo, honestly, for what they do, despite, not really releasing digital data all that much, Nintendo is on top of it with their sales earnings and all that, giving updated figures for software. It's actually pretty impressive when you compare it to some of these other publisher and platforms. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was nominated for Game of the Year at the Big 3 Game Award shows. It was nominated for 8 BAFTAs, including music, and it won animation and technical achievement. It was nominated for 9 DICE Awards, where it won Outstanding Achievement in Animation, Art Direction, Technical Achievement, and Family Game of the Year. And it was nominated for 6 awards at the Game Awards. It won the Annie Award for Outstanding Achievement for Character Animation in a Video Game, and it won the Hollywood Music and Media Award for Best Original Score Video Game. What is the legacy of Rift Apart? Well, Insomniac's going to be busy for a while, but, I guess they could have multiple teams working on games, I guess. You've got Spider-Man 2 launching in a few months. Development, I'm sure, has started on Wolverine, but a new Ratchet & Clank game is certainly not an impossibility, especially when the end of the game suggests a new adventure. The composer that I will talk about for this week for Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, his name is Wataru Hokoyama. And Wataru Hokoyama was born on August 24th, 1974 in Aizu, Fukushima, Japan. He grew up in Japan until he moved to the United States at age 16 to study music. He graduated from Interlochen Arts Academy in Michigan, the Cleveland Institute of Music, and the University of Southern California, where he received his classical and orchestral and film scoring training. He speaks Japanese and English, which, as he notes, really helps when he has to correspond back to Japan for game projects. He was mentored by original God of War composer Gerard Marino on his, quote, electronic music skills. Wataru Hokoyama says, quote, I kept on imagining that I'll be conducting an orchestra at a session of video game music that I write, and I kept on visualizing it. I talked to my friends about how I'd love to score a video game too. Then one day, I got the offer out of nowhere. I just received one random email asking me, would you be interested in scoring for our game? It turns out that game was Africa. And you're like, I don't know what Africa with a K is. Well, sure you do, if you remember the 2006 E3 press conference for Sony, which I guess just got uploaded by NoClip on YouTube in like a 1080p render. So the first time that any of us have seen that horrific Sony E3 press conference in full HD, it's a game with a lot of beautiful, realistic visuals of animals in the savannah and the desert and all that. And it was paired with this gorgeous Hollywood score, and it was at least nominated and won some awards, and Wataru Hokoyama composed that game's score. His approach, he says, quote, "My main purpose of composing music for film or video games is to serve the project by creating the atmosphere and the language of music that fits and helps the storytelling of each project. Whether it would work as standalone isn't a focus." In 2001, he was commissioned by the United States Air Force Band to premiere a new piece for the 400th anniversary of Jamestown's settlement, as well as the 60th anniversary of the U.S. Air Force. He's composed music for NPR's All Things Considered. He worked on string arrangements on the 30 Seconds to Mars album, A Beautiful Lie, and he's conducted some video games live concerts. He even assembled a concert band in his spare time called the Wataru Band. He says, quote, "It's an amateur symphonic band formed by my old friends and the former music students I taught a while ago. Basically, anyone who enjoys playing instruments can join from all over the world, and we have charity concerts every 2 years." This quote was taken from an interview from the early 2010s, and the website that it points to was not operational to see if it's still going. But Wataru Hokoyama seems to work regularly with Mark Mothersbaugh, as a part of Mothersbaugh's production company, Mutato Musica. It looks like he was on Twitter at Wataru Hokoyama, but I guess he is no longer there. You search for that possible handle, and it's there as if people were linking it in past tweets, but the hypertext is no longer there. So maybe he left Twitter, and maybe he's feeling better about that decision. I hope the best for him, honestly. Wataru Hokoyama's discography looks like this. He's a composer on Africa, Resident Evil 5, Connect Disneyland Adventures, Ace Combat 3D Cross Rumble, Soul Sacrifice, Knack, and most recently, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. But because of his work with Mark Mothersbaugh, he's done some additional music for film and TV projects, such as the Lego Ninjago movie, Thor Ragnarok, Hotel Transylvania 3 Summer Vacation, Holmes and Watson, the Lego Movie 2, the second part, The Croods, A New Age, and 2021's Rugrats reboot. He also has worked as a conductor for different game soundtrack recording projects, and that would be for the soundtracks for Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, Halo 2 Anniversary, Halo Wars 2, and Monster Hunter Rise. The soundtrack for Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is composed by Mark Mothersbaugh and Wataru Hokoyama. And if Mark Mothersbaugh's name sounds familiar, it is because we have covered him before on the show. He was the composer on The Sims 2, covered him on episode 125, literally the episode after Ratchet and Clank, where we covered Michael Bross. And so, to give you a refresher, in case you missed that episode, Mothersbaugh initially rose to fame as the co-founder, lead singer, and keyboardist of the late 70s new wave band Devo. Yes, the band for the song Whip It and more hits beyond that. He then continued to make a career composing music for TV, film, and games. Notable highlights include Rugrats, Thor Ragnarok, the first 3 Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter games, and many more. But when it came to the music for Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, the team at Insomniac decided that there would be 4 music pillars for the project. There's epic, to be able to create soaring compositions that elevate the action of the game. There's levity, to not be too serious, as this is a franchise that doesn't take itself too seriously, but also to not be overtly wacky, as humor in music can turn cartoonish fairly easily. There's unexpected, because the universe of Ratchet and Clank is all about the mashup or duality nature of combining ideas into unexpected results, and they wanted someone comfortable with the unusual and the surprising. And themes. Because Ratchet and Clank has never really had a theme, a musical motif that players could hum and say, "I've got the Ratchet theme stuck in my head." And so with these pillars of epic, levity, unexpected, and themes, Insomniac Games wanted the soundtrack to evoke a retro-futuristic sound. This approach would inform the sound direction and lead to their subsequent search for the right composer to fulfill this vision. Mark Mothersbaugh was suggested based off of his recent film work. And so the team said, well, instead of finding someone like Mark Mothersbaugh, why don't we just ask Mark? Hokoyama was in the pitch with Mothersbaugh, and after they accepted, they co-wrote the music together. The two, of course, had worked on many film projects together in the years leading up to this game. There was a blog post on PlayStation Blog about specifically the game and its soundtrack, and says, quote, "While Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart's score is mainly rooted in orchestral and electronic elements, unexpected instrumentation, such as concertina, pirate chanting, choir, guitar, conch shells, theremin, and more, frequently provide unique sonic backdrops to each locale. Mark even used some of his trademark synths, such as a Mini-Moog and Oberheim TVS-1, that have been featured on classic Devo albums." The first orchestral recording at Ocean Way Studios happened pre-COVID lockdown, but 2 more took place during the pandemic, with everyone remote except the musicians who were under strict safety measures. Then, the majority of the mixing, editing, integration, and testing was all done working from home. And it seemingly didn't really affect the game's release schedule too much. I mean, they launched a year after revealing the game. And honestly, a great soundtrack overall. So let's get into the 5 critical tracks for Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. I feel like we have to start with this first theme. It's the main theme, it's the big theme, it's Rift Apart. All music on the soundtrack is noted as being composed by Mark Mothersbaugh and Wataru Hokoyama. No necessary distinctions between, one composed this and another composed this. It's all listed as they worked on it together. And there aren't really any electronic instruments going on in this clip, at least. But this is important to have here because for a track called Rift Apart, represents the main theme, the main leitmotif. If there's talk about themes as being one of the tent poles to the franchise, and when Ratchet and Clank doesn't really have a theme to its whole franchise, well, this is the one for the game. I would say it's definitely the heroic theme for sure, and it gets used throughout the game. Whether they're in a tight spot, you may get a little more of a minor influence on it, but yeah, great orchestral recording, big triumphant fanfare, and just one that really stands out. I don't think it really plays on the title screen or anything, but big moments in the game for sure get this Rift Apart theme, and definitely hits one of those big tentpoles. We start to mix in some of those dimensional electronic instruments, though, as we get to number 2 on the Critical 5 for Rift Apart, and this is Ride Through the Omniverse. As much as I enjoy this game, I wish I could remember where exactly this track plays because it's so cool, especially that shift in the middle of the piece to the next kind of stanza, if you will. It just sounds so nice with those chords. It's pretty early on the soundtrack. It's like track 5 of 20, placed after a Sargasso track, and Sargasso is one of the big early planets after you get out of the nefarious city, if you will. But yeah, I mean, one of the big sort of set pieces that they kind of hit on throughout this game is your ability to grind on rails, or whether it's with the tether or with your boots, and then you're able to rift, tether, pull into different dimensions to continue your grinding when the track seems like it's going to disappear. Oh, no, wait, pull into this dimension and you're able to continue. Wouldn't surprise me if it's an action set piece like this, but just a really, really cool example. And you hear those synths going and just, yeah, it makes it feel like that retro futuristic. Mothersbaugh and Hokoyama bringing in the right instruments in addition with the orchestra to give that feeling. And I feel like this was just a really important piece to include overall because when the PlayStation blog post was talking about, well, here's some samples talking about like what you can expect from the album. Not only was Rift Apart there, the previous track, but this was as well. And it just sounds like a nice action piece that goes along with just a fun gameplay moment. I just wish I could pin down exactly where that was. But you want to talk about the theme tentpole? Well, if you have the heroic theme of Rift Apart, you better have that opposing leitmotif as well. Number 3 on the Critical 5 for Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is Ode to Nefarious. Yes, give me a theme for Emperor Nefarious, especially when he returns and is actually really threatening. See, Dr. Nefarious, throughout the recent Ratchet and Clank games before this, as the plot summary suggested, he's kind of not that big of a threat. He's never really won before, but when he goes to another dimension where his counterpart has won and has set up an empire, not surprising that this theme then borrows from other Empire themes in the past, shall we say. Looking at you, Imperial March from Star Wars. A different sort of tempo to it, but a dark, oppressive march nonetheless. Yeah, this one is a good one to have. Start with the orchestra, and then you hear at the end of the clip, kind of these dark synths come in. And what nefarious plans may be in place for the Dimensionator once Emperor Nefarious gets his hands on all the dimensions and access to all of them. Could he conquer other universes? Things like that in play. And so a good blend of the Empire March, but also the evil deeds that could be at work once he gets his hands on a fixed Dimensionator. It all builds up, though, to that final confrontation, though. Number 4 on the Critical 5 for Rift Apart. This is Culmination at Corsun 5. A nice way to hear that Nefarious theme come back in for the final boss against Emperor Nefarious. In the clip, you don't hear too much electronic instrumentation going on, except for maybe some pads underneath. But as the tide shifts a little bit more and Ratchet can make use of different dimensions, that gets added more and more. But I thought it was just a neat way to show how the theme gets used in the final battle. And it's a pretty interesting final battle, that's for sure. As someone who really struggled with the final boss in 2016's Ratchet and Clank, I was more relieved that, like, okay, good, I can at least finish this one. It's a good feeling there. But yeah, a really nice piece, of course, on 5, where it kind of all culminates with the fabric of space and time and stopping Emperor Nefarious. Just a good piece here. Again, nice to hear how that dark theme gets used but twisted and eventually would get wound back up into using the Rift Apart theme later to represent the heroic climax and the defeating of the evil. Just a good final boss theme. It's not doing anything that is like, oh my goodness, like, say, Elden Ring bringing back the main theme in an epic way. No, I think it's just a good use of keeping what's worked and using the themes to support the storytelling along with it. But as the credits roll and this piece comes in, I knew right when playing that it's like, well, if I ever talk about this on the show, this has to be on the Critical 5. It's a delight. And wrapping up the Critical 5 for Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is Join Me at the Top.
Join me at the top. Why don't you join me where the stars all shine and I will never flop? No, I won't. Just join me. Go on, fall in line. And no one's given me good reason to stop my usual power season. Join me at this spot. I forgot I'm everything you're not. Who am I?
Our greatness?
And who are you?
Wait, I'm not gonna sing this.
You're no good without me. How dare you ever doubt me? Now listen to this.
This almost Jafar-like villain song. I mean, that's really what I feel like he's channeling, especially there at the end of the clip. This is a musical number, a villain song that is performed by Emperor Nefarious, and it plays during the credits, featuring Dr. Nefarious that you hear a little bit at the end of the clip. Emperor Nefarious, of course, voiced by... I'll give you one more second to guess. Who is that voice? It is, of course, Robin Atkin Downes. Many roles over his illustrious voice acting career. But, of course, one that definitely taps in as he bellows in particular... Kazuhira Miller from Metal Gear Solid 5. I mean, come on, the same voice for sure, and makes that clear. A great performance as a villain during this game, and it was just such a delight to hear him belt this one out during the credits. Has no real impact on the game, but we love a good villain song, and for it to round out the experience during the credits, just wonderful. We've got 2 level themes here to round out the music selections here on the cutting room floor. The first of these 2 is Yardolis. This, of course, takes place on Ardolis. And Ardolis is a pirate-themed world. Could you have guessed that? Does it sound like pirate chanting? Well, sure enough, it is a pirate-themed world that Ratchet explores and has to pass pirate trials. Just a fun world overall, especially with this music that stood out. And when I was working up a best of 2021, I think I had this on my Critical 5 there, but honestly, to swap it out for a couple and put it on the cutting room floor, I think works really well here. Nice to hear the synths come in after the chanting and like kind of support it. Just sounds so good with that kind of victorious fanfare. A little bit of a riff on the Rift Apart theme. Just so neat. But yeah, does it sound like anything else in particular? Can you believe we've passed 20 years since Pirates of the Caribbean Curse of the Black Pearl debuted in theaters? And man, oh man, Klaus Badelt's score to that film has certainly endured as a way for the last 20 years of like giving pirate-themed things a sound. And boy, you hear that here for sure. Not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. In fact, it works really well. But Mothersbaugh and Hokoyama do a really nice job of supplementing that pirate chanting with those electronic instruments. And so good. Yar, Dolis. Yar! But another punny title takes place here for number 2, the other one on the cutting room floor. And this one is called Blizzar Primed and Ready. One of the more memorable levels, I would say, in the game is Blizzar Prime. And so when you're Prime, 'D, primed and ready, that's funny. On Blizzar Prime, Rivet is looking for a forge to help Clank repair the Dimensionator. And not only is it good to put a Rivet level here in this collection of music, but also I think Blizzar Prime is one of the starkest examples of when you are working between two dimensions and you have different points that you can rift tether into, where you go between one dimension where things are ruined and terrible and one where things are not ruined. It's not as on the fly as a level like, that Titanfall 2 level. If you ever played Titanfall 2, if you haven't played Titanfall 2, great first-person shooter campaign. Don't know if it's a soundtrack we ever bring to the show, but anyway, there's a great level especially for a first-person shooter, much less a first-person game, where you're traveling in between two dimensions, and at the click of a button, you go back and forth, and it works really well. It's not as instantaneous as this, but it has a similar feeling where you have to work your way through this world to achieve your goal, but you're going and tethering between these two dimensions. Anyway, all that being said, it makes the level stand out a lot. And not only when you listen to this track, one of the really strongest examples of like that synth coming in and cutting into the orchestral action of this piece. And just a really nice example of like almost like the two dimensions working in opposition against each other with the heroic action, but also the dimension work at play. Just a really nice piece, and I think highlights. It's a tough level to be sure, but it's one of the more memorable levels of the game, I think. What will I never forget about Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart? Well, for the Platinum Trophy, you have to start the game up a little bit again. So you get this new weapon, and you have to kind of flesh it out a little bit to get that last trophy and make it pop. So it's not something you can do all in one play, but it does not take too long. That's kind of like an Insomniac staple, I think, when it comes to their trophy design. Like, you'll get a few things that you need on a New Game Plus, but it doesn't take that much work to do. Anyway, just a delightful game, especially for someone like me who is pretty new to the Ratchet and Clank franchise. I played the remake, got stuck on that frustrating final boss. But I'm like, it's a PlayStation 5 exclusive within the first year of its launch cycle, and one of the few at that point to really take advantage. And of course, at its reveal, to be like, this is why you need a PlayStation 5. It's these world loading and at the click of a button, almost essentially. And yeah, it was just a delightful experience. The soundtrack with Mark Mothersbaugh and Wataru Hokoyama, amazing, fits so well with the orchestral action, but also the synth work and the electronic instruments, and the performance. Jennifer Hale as Rivet is so good. And I feel like Insomniac has to know they have something with Rivet and how she joins up with the gang at the end. There's got to be a story to tell with the Lombax family and meeting the Lombaxes through dimensions and things like that. There's got to be another Ratchet & Clank game in the future. How soon? I don't know. Insomniac's churning out some games for sure, but I would not write out a possibility within the next 5 years or so. And that will do it for this solo episode of Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. My co-host Joe DeVader is over on Twitter at StringPixel. And you can find the video version of the show on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel. But it's that MP3 podcast version that you really want, and that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. It's where Joe's other podcast, Smash Your Pieces, is hosted, and you can find Smash Your Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts, on catchers all around the globe, from Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of podcast episodes, but we also have a playlist of video game music. And if we talk about a video game music track and it's on Spotify, it gets added this huge game music playlist. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is on Spotify. So beyond just the track Rift Apart, which we included as an honorable mention for Best of 2021, the rest of those will be added to the list shortly. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Give us some feedback. What tracks did we miss? Also, give us some suggestions for games to cover in the future. All right, next week, it's a big event, and every year we do a certain thing for it. So, Joe will be talking about Stuart Ferguson, and I'll be talking about Hideki Okugawa. To play us out, we like to highlight a fan cover, a fan remix, whether it's on YouTube, OC Remix, wherever. I'm like, I gotta hear who's done a cover of Join Me at the Top. And sure, there were some interesting examples there, but then I found one from the YouTuber Poke. Or is it Poke? P-O-K-E. That's all it's listed there. She is Polish. And so it's a Polish cover of Join Me at the Top with a woman, obviously, as the vocalist. She also does a little bit of a take on, the Dr. Nefarious, the more high-pitched voice. And you gotta watch the video because she also brings a little Dr. Nefarious puppet into the mix to also play off the two. You'll hear it. It's so good. I obviously don't understand Polish, but it's a really nice take on this great villain song. So that will do it. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Sięgnij ze mną gwiazd I planet, wykąp się w ich pięknym blasku. Wiem, że nigdy nie przestanę.